You are listening to the Empowering Working Moms podcast, Real Talk with Dr. Prianca Naik, a show to help professional moms in survival mode to take hold of their lives and thrive. If you're ready to take powerful action to create your best life, then this is the show for you. I'm your host, Dr. Prianca Naik, board-certified internal medicine physician and certified life coach. Now let's get to it and dive in. You are listening to the Empowering Working Moms podcast, episode number 15. Hello there. Thank you so much for tuning in this week. I am so excited to talk about self-forgiveness today as a part of my self series. And the reason I'm talking about self-related things is that we as women often are taught to be selfless and put other people's needs in front of our own constantly. Many of us grow up in homes where we are responsible for our parents' happiness. I know that in Indian culture, per my experience, children are often an extension of their parents, and their achievements really are a reflection of their parents, and where one person begins, the other person ends. There's no delineation, and this is really not necessarily a healthy way to be. So in talking about the self, I'm purposely focusing on this because we need to really focus on ourselves in terms of our self-care, our self-love, our self-forgiveness in order to be the best people that we can be, the best moms we can be, setting a good example for our children. And really, the more that we work on ourselves, in the end, the more we're actually able to give to other people. So let's dive in to self-forgiveness. Self-care is a major term that's thrown around as the antidote for so many difficulties. And I bring this up because honestly, it kind of annoys me. People push self-care as the answer to all, and it's not. Anon talks about self-care as a way to nourish oneself when you're an addict, recovered, or active. So self-focus is a part of my program. And like I just said, I know what you're thinking. Self-focus, that's selfish. But truly, to be at peace, to move past emotional exhaustion, to really cultivate that happy life and a good, healthy relationships with ourselves, this is critical. And a part of that process is self-forgiveness. Many of us grew up in homes where an A- was not good enough. I know whatever mistakes I made were drilled into me and discussed for years after. One of my family members still brings up something that I did 22 years ago. So with that kind of childhood, and maybe you can take a minute to reflect upon yours, of course I am hard on myself. So self-forgiveness is a critical part of our healing process. Were you told what you did was good enough growing up? Or was nothing ever good enough? Did your parents forgive you for your mistakes? Or did they hammer you with criticism? How about you? Are you hard on yourself? Do you expect a lot from yourself and maybe even others? Are you beating yourself up? Take some time to reflect on these questions. Maybe even pause the podcast or do it later if you're driving. Because once we figure out where we came from, how we grew up, we can give ourselves, our current selves, compassion. Even our past selves. Why we did what we did, even if our current self doesn't agree with past decisions. Of course, we do things we regret. We're human. Our perfectionist tendencies make us even more hard on ourselves. Beating ourselves up by self-scolding and negative talk, that's something we do often, isn't it? One thing I'll say, which I practice and say to my clients as well, is to eliminate any name-calling of yourself in your head. For example, when you drop something, don't automatically call yourself stupid or clumsy. If you do, or you find yourself doing that, stop yourself in your tracks and practice this. Over time, it really does become a habit. Day-to-day errors we must accept as a part of our human experience. As I've said before, remember, resistance is so much a cause of our human suffering. Resisting a mistake or going over and over again in our heads about our mistakes or what went wrong, obsessing only adds an extra layer of suffering. You can actually decide to accept a mistake. And maybe you're thinking, what? Accept a mistake? No way. But yes, we have to stretch our brains to do this hard work. So if that's a stretch for you, I know you're capable of pushing yourself. You can decide to accept the mistake and really notice what you're feeling, the vibration in your body upon reflection of the mistake. Once you do that, you can take action in deciding how to move forward. The past is useful for learning, but not dwelling. The past is useful for learning, but not dwelling. Remember that. We can decide to learn from the past, but we don't have to ruminate. When we make intentional decisions, we take back our power. We live our lives as opposed to feeling like life is living us. This is how we empower ourselves. This is how we get control of our life's experience. In worrying about what other people think about certain aspects of our lives, we shift our focus away from ourselves and on to others. Remember, this is actually the easier thing to do, the easy way out. Because what is hard, what we really are afraid of, is our own judgment of ourselves. Thus, can we show ourselves compassion and forgive ourselves for what we think may not have been the best behavior or perhaps best decisions? If we can practice that, we can learn to do that, and we can create inner peace and ease. When we feel overburdened or life feels heavy, we can carry on a bit lighter, maybe even sleep better. That sounds pretty appealing, right? If we wrong someone, we can ask for their forgiveness, but also forgive ourselves at the same time to truly create closure. And as I said before, understanding why you are the way you are. What was your childhood like? Did your parents meet your core needs? Unconditional love, safety, did those exist? How about traumas you may have experienced? This is something that is more in the realm of therapy, but worth exploring in therapy in order to move forward with having more self-compassion and forgiveness. I highly recommend the Mindful Self-Compassion Workbook by Kristen Neff. In it, she talks about embracing our imperfections in order to build the necessary resilience to thrive. Being able to be present for others means showing self-love, self-compassion, and self-forgiveness. We've all made mistakes, so working through the process of forgiving ourselves and past behaviors, we can see if we can meet ourselves halfway. Understanding that person from 20 years ago or even 2 years ago. Where was she? What was she thinking? Why did she do what she did? And even if your current self doesn't agree with what your past self did, you can try to put yourself in your old self's shoes and have self-forgiveness and compassion. I want you to think of one major thing that haunts you from your past, some failure or shame you have. Go through who you were back then. Who influenced you? Why did you behave in a certain way? And again, see if you can give yourself compassion, give yourself forgiveness for whatever took place. For me, this is not going to an Ivy League school. I know maybe that sounds ridiculous to you, but I was shamed and berated and I was called a failure throughout my 20s until I got into medical school. And I didn't even realize, but this haunted me way more than I knew because 1 year ago, the teacher in a writing course I took, Molly, from the Brooklyn Writers Collective, pointed out the recurring theme in my writing of discussing getting into WashU in St. Louis, which is not an Ivy League school, perseverating on that, and how I really need to flesh that out, write more about it to make my peace with it. So anything that comes up for you regularly, like that, for example, please consider doing the aforementioned exercise. Now, think of a shameful behavior or decision that you would not want people to know. Something you never talk about, but it's in the shadows. What comes up for you when I mention this? What would you say to a friend who had this identical situation? Would you find a way to have compassion for them? I'm going to guess that the answer is yes. So can you allocate some of that forgiveness and compassion, but for yourself? Life coaching and finding your way out of exhaustion, it does not mean saying bye to all of your imperfections. It means constantly working on yourself, being aware, and doing the hard work. The other evening, I was working on a very important document. I read it 4 times. I stayed up late, reading it pretty obsessively, messing with my sleep. And the first story I told myself was, I'm being a perfectionist, I'm obsessing. So I acknowledged this. I was beginning to beat myself up, old habits ingrained. But we can work against these habits. I decided, remember, you can always decide. I decided to change my narrative to, this is very important for such and such reason. And that is why I'm working so hard, because I work hard. See the difference there? I hope you can practice doing this for yourself as well. When it comes to mistakes, errors, missteps, remember to go easy on yourself. Practice self-compassion and forgiveness. And after we forgive ourselves, we can also reflect on lessons learned, so we don't repeat the regrettable behavior. We are always learning and growing and changing, right? You have nothing to prove. We have to love ourselves first. We have to approve of ourselves first before seeking any external approval or validation, which honestly doesn't really help us be happy either. Remembering that life is a process. We are not perfect. This is a fact. We're inherently not perfect, but we do our best. We, as working moms, we manage a lot. And there are new opportunities for growth and learning presenting themselves all the time. We just have to open our eyes wide open to see them. And this attitude can shift our perspective to a more open, happy, peaceful life. In her book, Self-Compassion, Kristen Neff says that self-compassion honors the fact that all human beings are fallible, that wrong choices and feelings of regret are inevitable. The more we can accept this, the better off we will be. We won't go through life without making mistakes. We won't go through life without hurting people inadvertently. We will always make mistakes. So we can learn to accept and make our peace with this. If you are a professional mom in survival mode and want to move through mental exhaustion, get out of a toxic relationship or job, and feel confident and in control of your life, get in touch with me for a free 30-minute consultation call to see just what's possible. www.priancanaikmdcoaching.as.me, link in the show notes, and I will talk to you next week. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Empowering Working Moms podcast, Real Talk with Dr. Prianca Naik. If you are ready to get unstuck and out of survival mode to live your best life, I want to invite you to book a free 30-minute consultation call with me. To get started, visit priancanaikmdcoaching.as.me. Link in the show notes.